Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, January 22nd, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about Senator Kyrsten Sinema, now formerly censured by the Arizona Democratic Party. I mean, you have seen many Republicans censured by their political party in their individual states for being outspoken critics of President Trump, but rarely do you see headlines about a statewide Democratic Party censuring their politicians, especially now that they have control of the United States Senate, they have control of the United States House of Representatives, and they have a president in the White House. But the Arizona Democrats decided that it was time to censure Kyrsten Sinema in response to her position on the filibuster and thus on voting rights. They say that Kyrsten Sinema does not take voting rights to the same extent that other Arizona Democrats should and currently do. And with this, they voted all together to censure her. Now, this doesn't remove her from office. This doesn't take away any title under her name. But what this does do is separates her from the statewide Democratic Party. This doesn't make her an independent, nor does it make her a Republican, but it essentially is just some type of formal way of saying that your views no longer align with the statewide party that puts you in this position. Kyrsten Sinema has been a representative. She has represented the Arizona Democratic Party very well in the House of Representatives. Though there were concerns from more progressive members of the Democratic Party that she was a blue dog or a centrist-leaning Democrat, she had been a pretty reliable vote up until about now. And you see, Kyrsten Sinema is probably one of the most well-known senators despite being first elected back in 2018. I mean, looking at the 2018 Senate election results, Kyrsten Sinema was actually quite a surprise. Because Republicans gained seats in the United States Senate, people did not expect certain races to go to the Democratic Party. They had just lost Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, Florida. Four of those states had flipped to the GOP, but Arizona went to the Democratic Party, and that was pretty substantial. Now, looking at Kyrsten Sinema's margin of victory, it wasn't exactly a super large margin, but it was certainly impressive. And as someone who was now newly elected to the Senate, she definitely has made a super large name for herself, one that is recognizable outside of the state of Arizona by many people. And that's because she has pushed back on the filibuster time and time again. And now the Democrats are simply over it. They are tired of playing her game. They are tired of allowing her to represent the state of Arizona and vote against a filibuster change. Now, the thing is, the state of Arizona isn't exactly a state that is solid Democratic. So, on one hand, some could argue, and I'm sure this might be backing a lot of what Sinema thinks, that she cannot win in a state like Arizona if she votes to change the filibuster. But that simply isn't true. I mean, the state of Arizona, if we're being completely honest, isn't going to treat the filibuster as an end-all be-all when it comes down to electing their United States senators. And also, the state of Arizona was more conservative in 2018 than it is today, at least based off of the population and the growth that we have seen and its voting history. While 2018 was a very good year for the Democratic Party, Democrats replicated that Senate election margin of victory with Mark Kelly, who had no prior political experience. He won that Senate election despite the Democratic Party performing 5 points worse on the national average when it came down to the generic congressional vote, and they still won the state of Arizona. And get this, did exactly what Sinema did, flipped a state from red to blue against the exact same Republican. So, Kyrsten Sinema isn't exactly returning to a state that is going to punish her, per se, for voting to change the filibuster. In fact, Mark Kelly announced that he will support a change to the filibuster for voting rights, and he's up for re-election in 2022. So the Arizona Democrats really don't see a reason as to why she is deciding to block voting rights legislation. And while she isn't the one directly voting against it, what she is doing is not allowing the filibuster rules to change. And of course, Joe Manchin is the other half of this. He definitely deserves 50% of the blame when it comes down to it. Arguably, I guess 25%, half of the blame should go to the GOP, 25% to Sinema, 25% to Manchin. But because Democrats are in the majority, you expect to get things done, at least if you're on that side, or really anyone who looks at it from the lens of you control everything, so why can't you do anything? But looking at the position that Manchin is in, I mean, he comes from a state that is much more conservative than the state of Arizona. I mean, seeing the 2018 results, they were near identical in terms of the margin, but by no means is Arizona nearly as right-wing as the state of West Virginia. Joe Manchin survived in that position because he is a centrist Democrat. Kyrsten Sinema could be voting with the Democratic Party 100% of the time and still very well win in 2024 if the national environment is just slightly better than where it was in 2020 or even on par. But the Arizona Democratic Party just simply can't comprehend why this is happening. They can't understand why Sinema is making such a decision. So they issued this statement along with their censure of her, saying that the Arizona Democratic Party is a diverse coalition with plenty of room for policy disagreements. However, on the matter of the filibuster and the urgency to protect voting rights, we have been crystal clear. They said that as a party, their job is to support their Democratic candidates, and they appreciate Senator Sinema's leadership in passing the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure law. However, and again, we're back to this point, we are also here to advocate for our constituents, and the ramifications of failing to pass federal legislation what protects the right to vote are too large and far-reaching. While we take no pleasure in this announcement, the Arizona Democratic Party Executive Board has decided to formally censure Senator Sinema as a result of her failure to do whatever it takes to ensure the health of our democracy. I mean, these are hard-hitting words. And what this means is not only is she separated from the strength of the Arizona Democratic Party, she is also poised to be primaried in 2024. With this filibuster discussion, after she decided early on that she would not vote to change the filibuster rules and is now doubling down on that every single chance that she can get, the Arizona Democrats now see her as a threat. They now see her as some type of Democrat that simply isn't going to back them when necessary. While her voting record is strong for the Democrats, I mean, she has a 95% plus voting record with the Democratic Party, you only get a voting record if you actually end up having to vote on that bill, which means all of these withholding and withstanding isn't replicated and isn't held up when it comes down to the 538 tracker or any type of congressional tracker when you look at the partisan vote and how the senators decide to vote. Keep that in mind. While it may say Senator Sinema has backed the Democratic Party on 96% of issues when they came to a vote, think about it this way. Voting rights never came to a vote. Think about it this way. Big plans, a lot of money, never came down to a vote. A lot of these things simply never made it to the Senate floor because she will not vote to change the filibuster. And this is not me trying to criticize her in any way for this or not. This is not meant to be some type of partisan opinion. What I am doing is merely explaining to you where this pushback on her comes from and where this idea that, Sinema is obligated to vote for the Democratic Party in many of these positions, and also just bringing up the fact that numbers sometimes can be misleading. But like I was saying, the 2024 primary isn't super close, but it definitely is in a point where we are going to see a lot of discussion, and we've already seen polls. Looking at the candidates here, what you have are a bunch of potential names. Usually when you have an incumbent senator, people lay back. They say, you know what, I'm not going to a primary an incumbent senator simply because it doesn't make sense. Non-incumbents are always weaker than incumbents, but that might not be the case in the state of Arizona. Because when you take a look at Kyrsten Sinema's approval rating amongst the Democratic Party, they don't like her. If they aren't inspired to vote for her, what's to say that a non-incumbent might do actually better, especially amongst the Democratic Party? What you find here, according to OH Predictive Insights, is that 72% of Democratic primary voters want a Democrat other than Kyrsten Sinema. And 26%, just 1 in 4, say they would prefer Sinema in 2024. I mean, while she may be getting it up with the, Republicans and independents in terms of her approval from where it was 2 years ago, right after she was elected, those aren't the people voting for you. No matter how many Republicans you please, no matter how many right-leaning independents you please, 90% of the time, 95% even, they are voting for their candidate. People aren't going to say, I'd rather have Kyrsten Sinema, someone who almost always votes with Democrats but holds them up on some occasion, than a Republican. If you can flip the Senate majority, if you are a Republican, you will do that. You're not going to give it up just so you can say that I like Kyrsten Sinema and I'm going to vote to re-elect her. It's some type of myth that rarely ever translates to an actuality in our elections, especially considering how polarized we are. Because all it will take is President Trump going down to the state of Arizona and saying, well, Kyrsten Sinema has done a lot in blocking Democratic legislation, now it's time for her to go. Because 95% of the time when it comes down to a vote, she's not on our side. And that 5% she is, and a lot of the work that she does to block it is nice, but wouldn't you rather have a Republican? And that will play so well, and it will be effective. And Democrats are going to look at this and say, okay, Sinema hasn't even backed our legislation. Sinema hasn't done this. So why are we going to support her? Why are we going to turn out in droves for her as we did in 2018? That's a question they're going to ask themselves. And that's why her approval rating matters, and that's why this discussion of a primary matters. Because if practically 3/4 of the voters in the state of Arizona on the Democratic side do not like you, you probably aren't going to win that primary. And that's what this polling number is telling us here, or polling numbers, because there's a bunch of them. Amongst the candidate list here, again, remember that top tier candidates rarely ever are discussed or publicly express interest in challenging incumbent senators. You have a lot here. You have Ruben Gallego, who is a United States representative, Kate Gallego, who is the mayor of Phoenix, Kathy Hoffman, the Arizona superintendent of public instruction. You have a state senator, you have the mayor of Tucson, you have another U.S. representative and the former mayor of Phoenix. I mean, you have some very top names, and you know what happens every single time they face off against Kyrsten Sinema? They beat her every single time. There's not a single poll, whether you take the one from Data for Progress, which is a Democratic-leaning source, or OH Predictive Insights, which is a nonpartisan source, and you take a look at the numbers between Sinema and any potential other Democratic challenger, and what you find is that she simply cannot even win a single one of these races. Even in crossed up primaries where there are a bunch of candidates. For instance, you have, multiple instances of people on the ballot, yet Kyrsten Sinema at most in that poll gets 19%. And altogether, when looking at all of the data in one-on-one or multi-candidate races, what Kyrsten Sinema gets at most is 26% of the vote. And that's when her opponent gets 55% of the vote. I mean, at this point in time, we are in a position where Kyrsten Sinema, if challenged by a Democrat, will lose that primary. Forget the general election. And while that may make it technically more challenging based off of the incumbency rule, that really is up for consideration because there's no guarantee that Sinema would even have any type of enthusiasm boost on her side other than the fact that she may be approved of slightly by Republicans and by some independents. But losing your core base is never a good thing. I mean, that's as if Donald Trump was out there pandering to Democrats and independents and not even winning any of their votes. And I could truly see that happening in the state of Arizona. And that's why this is so threatening for Kyrsten Sinema altogether. Because again, to remind you, Arizona is not a red state. They may have a Republican governor, but they have 2 Democratic senators. The majority of the House of Representative members from Arizona are Democrats, and Joe Biden just flipped the state for the first time since 92. And, you see that in 96. You see that in, say, Arizona isn't a state where, Democrats are going to be expanding off 2022, potentially in 2024, but that simply isn't true. I mean, while Democrats may lose the majority of the seats in the state of Arizona in 2022, there's no guarantee that the state itself is going to be red in 2026, even 2024, or 2028 and beyond. The state itself is taking a leftward change and is moving further and further towards the left. That's why Arizona flipped for the first time in decades, because the population growth there was enough to flip many of these voters and push additional voters towards the left and make the state where it is right now. And keeping that in mind, Arizona is only going to become more likely to elect a Democrat. So what I see from this pretty much is just a major pushback on Kyrsten Sinema for a position that she truly does not need to take. While I understand this is how she may feel personally, in terms of electability, it isn't working for her. And because this is the political channel, I'm not trying to offer her any type of advice or try to criticize her personal judgments or the way that she treats Senate votes, but I am here to tell you that certain votes are going to make you unelectable. And while she may think this makes her electable, it's doing the exact opposite. Forget the general election, she probably won't make it through the primary. And that's the harsh reality. The primary is always that first check on you as a candidate, and as an incumbent senator, you should be landsliding that election. But the fact that she can't even get above 26% of the vote in a two-way race where people only have 2 options, you can't even get above 26%, it is a telling sign about where people want to go and how people perceive you. And that is where, we see a very clear distinction between where you push the limit. And Kyrsten Sinema has exceeded it well beyond. I mean, she has given the Democratic Party a majority that has been rendered useless because of this position. And while a lot of it does fall on Joe Manchin as well, there is that possibility that if Sinema flipped, Manchin would as well. But because they are the two that have been completely mentioned all the time since Joe Biden was inaugurated, since Democrats won the majority, since Senator Chuck Schumer became the majority leader in the United States Senate, it has always been Sinema and Manchin. And in this case, while the West Virginia Democratic Party might not necessarily be upset with Manchin, the Arizona Democratic Party absolutely is. And the Arizona Democratic Party could very well primary her and win that general election because the state itself is not as red as West Virginia, and nor should it be treated as red looking at the previous election results. So in moving I guess moving forward for Kyrsten Sinema, I think she is going to face some very harsh realities. While there is some discussion that she is considering a presidential bid or considering making an additional name for herself through some other type of avenue, at the end of the day, losing your core base is the last thing you want to do as a congressperson. And while she is not necessarily making herself lose to Republicans because of this position, it could very well contribute to a loss if she was to exhibit one. I do think that if she was the Democratic primary winner in 2024, that it's still very possible for her to win the general election, but she has to get there first. A lot of these positions that she's taking, a lot of these statements and speeches that she's giving on the Senate floor to reiterate her support for the filibuster or to reiterate her centrist position, I mean, she has gone from a point where she has criticized exactly what she's doing right now. That's why the Democrats are angry with her. But that is her right. As an elected official, she can represent the state of Arizona however she deems fit. But if the state of Arizona decides to get rid of her, that is also well within their right. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.